960 men, cut down in a single charge by a single sword, by one man alone on a hilltop in the ruin of Roman Britain. That's the story. And it was written down 300 years later, by a man who wasn't there, in a kingdom that needed a hero. Here's what should trouble you. The one writer close enough to count the years on his own fingers described that battle in full, and never once wrote the name Arthur. The closer you stand to King Arthur, the more he disappears. So who put him on that hill? And why? This is the fallen kingdom. Every century has its secrets, and we dig them up. Subscribe and you won't miss what we uncover next. Today, the most famous king who may never have worn a crown. Start where the trail is warmest. A British monk named Gildas sits down sometime in the 540s to write a furious sermon about the ruin of his homeland. He calls it On the Ruin of Britain. It is angry, it is biblical, and crucially, it is early. Gildas is writing within living memory of the events he describes, perhaps 40 years after them. And he describes the great battle, the siege of Mount Badon, where the Britons broke the Saxon advance and bought themselves a generation of peace. Gildas was, by his own account, born the very year it happened. This is as close as the record ever gets to the real event. So who won it? Gildas doesn't say. He names no commander at Badon. The closest he comes is praising an earlier leader of the resistance, Ambrosius Aurelianus, the last of the Romans, he calls him. Some scholars read the grammar as crediting Ambrosius with the victory. What Gildas never does, in a document built entirely out of naming names, kings and sins, is mention anyone called Arthur. The man who should be the star witness doesn't know the hero exists. Now, absence isn't proof. Gildas was writing a sermon, not a chronicle. Maybe Arthur was simply someone he chose not to flatter. But the silence doesn't stop with Gildas. Even the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, written generations later by the other side, the people Arthur supposedly beat, never names him. For more than 3 centuries after Badon, the record has a hero-shaped hole in it. There is one possible exception, and it's a tantalizing one. An old Welsh war poem called Y Gododdin, a lament for warriors who died fighting in the north, praises one fighter for the carnage he wrought, then adds a strange little caveat. He was no Arthur, a throwaway line, but look what it assumes. It assumes everyone already knows Arthur is the measuring stick, the gold standard of slaughter a hero is judged against. If that line is original, Arthur was a legend by around the year 600, and the case is closed. But the poem survives in a single manuscript copied centuries later, and that line sits among passages scholars believe were added during transmission. The honest answer is that we can't tell whether it's original to the poem or slipped in later, and no one has ever been able to prove it either way. So even our one early witness to the name may be a later hand. We have a hero everyone measures against. We just can't find a single thing he did. Then, around the year 829, Arthur walks onto the page fully armed. A Welsh compilation called the Historia Britonum, the History of the Britons, traditionally pinned on a cleric named Nennius, gives us the first datable mention of Arthur by name. And it's a spectacular debut. It lists 12 battles he fought against the Saxons, climaxing at Badon, where, the text says, Arthur killed 960 men in a single assault, by his own hand. 2 things matter here, and they pull in opposite directions. First, Nennius does not call Arthur a king. He calls him Dux Bellorum, leader of battles, a war commander who fought alongside the kings of Britain, not above them. The crown isn't here yet. Second, consider who's writing and when. Nennius worked in Wales under pressure from Anglo-Saxon expansion. His book is, among other things, a political weapon, an argument that the Britons were the rightful owners of the island, and the Saxons were latecomers. A propagandist under siege needs a champion who once threw the Saxons back. And right on cue, here is one. Killing them by the 100. By his own admission, Nennius assembled his history by heaping together everything he could find. Old annals, scraps of poetry, folklore. This isn't reportage, it's a hero being built, 3 centuries after the fact, for a job that needed doing. Watch what's actually happening across these documents, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Gildas gives us a battle, and no man. A war poem gives us a name, and no deeds. Nennius gives us deeds, 12 of them, and no dates. And then, in the 10th century, a set of Welsh annals supplies the last missing piece. Time. The Annales Cambriae fix Arthur to a calendar. Badon, they say, fell around 516, a date set down 4.5 centuries after the battle, and one that doesn't even agree with Gildas. And Arthur carried the cross of Christ on his shoulders for 3 days. And then, around 537, comes a single devastating line. The strife of Camlan, in which Arthur and Medrawt both fell. That's the first time anyone records Arthur's death. It's also the first appearance of Medrawt, the name that becomes Mordred. The annals don't tell us whether the 2 men died as enemies or as allies. They just fall together, and Britain mourns. Do you see the pattern? Each witness hands the next one exactly what it was missing. A battle gets a hero, the hero gets a name, the name gets victories, the victories get a date, and a death. Nobody is lying exactly. They're each adding one true feeling detail to a figure who grows more solid every time he's copied. This isn't a memory being preserved, it's a memory being assembled. And then one man finishes the job. Around 1136, a cleric named Geoffrey of Monmouth writes The History of the Kings of Britain and turns the war commander into the legend you know. Geoffrey takes Nennius's 12 battles. He takes Camlan from the annals. He borrows names floating in Welsh tradition: Kay, Bedivere, Guinevere, Uther, the sword that will become Excalibur. And he welds them into a single magnificent narrative. Here, for the first time, Arthur is a king. He's crowned, he conquers Gaul, he marches on Rome, he's betrayed at home, falls at Camlan, and is carried off to the Isle of Avalon. The crown, the conquest, the betrayal, the mystical departure, none of it is in the earlier record. It arrives all at once, 600 years after the supposed events. Geoffrey claimed he was translating an ancient book. No such book has ever been found. What we can prove is that he stitched his Arthur together from the very documents we just walked through. And then he added a crown. Everything after Geoffrey was layered on by later writers, the Round Table a generation on, then Lancelot and the Grail in French romance. The king was already complete. Geoffrey built him. So, myth or memory? Before I answer, here's the honest state of the field. Most specialists who study this period now lean away from a real historical Arthur. They argue there may be no man here at all, that he began as a figure of folklore and was only later mistaken for history. That's not the fringe view anymore. It's closer to the mainstream one. I'm going to take the other side. Here's the one thing even the skeptics don't dispute. Badon was real, and somebody won it. Gildas, who never says the name Arthur, tells us that much. That's my colonel. Not the crown, not the conquest of Gaul, just a real victory with a real victor, though his name may not have been Arthur at all. So here's my answer. Memory. But memory heavily edited. Because everything the legend added looks borrowed. The name may have drifted in from a Roman officer called Arthurius, posted to Britain centuries too early to be the man. The campaign in Gaul may be a fading echo of a British king named Reathamus, who vanished after a defeat near a town called Avalon. And the victory at Badon itself may have belonged to the one leader Gildas does name, Ambrosius. Pull the threads and you don't find one man, you find a composite, a hero assembled from spare parts by writers separated by centuries, each of whom needed him to exist. The real King Arthur isn't buried in a grave waiting to be found. He's spread across 4 manuscripts, growing a little larger in each one. We didn't lose the historical Arthur. We wrote him, and then we forgot we'd done it. That's the case. The verdict's yours now. If this one stayed with you, the next is already open. Subscribe and we'll find it together. Every century has its secrets. We dig them up.